All right, and the kettlebell lift that everybody is training for, the kettlebell snatch. Now, please understand that the overhead kettlebell snatch is an advanced lift, and it has nothing necessarily to do with your strength necessarily, but it has everything to do with the amount of technique that goes into it. All right, because we start off in that deep hip hinge position and we end up standing with arms straight up overhead, there's a lot of moving parts. So you could spend years refining the kettlebell snatch just like how you would your swing. But in this video, I'm going to give you a primer on the lift from top to bottom, bottom to top, and then go over a few common mistakes that most of us are guilty of at one time or another with training the snatch. So let's get on into it. So first of all, how do you know if you're ready to start tackling the snatch? Well, number one, if you're working with a coach, which I hope you are, it's probably just going to fit into a logical progression in your programming. But if you want a quick standard or test or diagnostic, I recommend that you not start snatching a particular weight until you can easily do a Turkish get-up all the way up and all the way down with said weight, and also being able to do a really high kettlebell swing with a particular weight. So I'm going to demonstrate what I mean. This isn't exactly a high pull, but rather a high swing that floats. We're going to emphasize a float just over the top of the head. Okay, so it looks like this. So hopefully what you notice there is a few things. Number one, I'm keeping a good deep backswing. If you're gonna power a snatch all the way up overhead, you want as much power coming from the hips as you can muster, okay? We're not yanking with the arm, we're powering all that weight with the hips. I'm also keeping a good midline with my working arm. Really, what I like to think is I like to imagine a thin red line right down the center of my vision. Really when doing all single arm work, swings, definitely snatches. And I know that if I can keep my working hand thumb tracing that imaginary red line, I know I've got a solid midline position, okay? Specifically, I like to think about tightening up the pec to make sure the shoulder doesn't start drifting out, okay? So those are a couple things to keep in mind. One, own the get up, own that overhead stability. Then number two, make sure you're comfortable and strong enough to power a weight just up overhead. You notice I've got a slight bend in the elbow as I come up because we want that bell close, being able to control the bell in that manner. Knock those two things out, and then we can start talking about the snatch. All right, and once you are comfortable and confident with powering that bell just up overhead, really, the only thing you gotta do is punch and lock out. Easier said than done, I realize. But you keep that midline focus, keep the pec, keep the lat, and then when you lock out, I want you to think about simultaneously locking out strong by pushing your knuckles to the ceiling or to the sky, wherever you're training, and then simultaneously tensing up the lat to make sure you're packed down in a socket. So whenever you're locking out a snatch, you have a simultaneous intention of locking up and locking down. That will give you a strong position. So what I'm going to demonstrate is a high swing, and then I'm gonna lock it out. So you can see it's just one little extra step. Now, Once you've achieved your lockout, ideally, you've kept the weight close to the torso, to the face, all the way up, so you don't have any flip and bang on the forearm. Once you've achieved a good lockout, do not throw it back down on your first few times training. Instead, what I want you to do is to use an active negative to pull the weight back down to the rack position nice and strong. So that's the snatch to negative, and honestly, that's a fantastic exercise. Snatch up, pull down strong. That's a great shoulder exercise, great tricep exercise. And again, you're helping to build the snatch technique, the lungs and the buns and the guns, but without all the extra technicalities that go into the drop, okay? We're gonna cover that next, but again, one more time, check it out. I'm gonna swing, high swing, and snatch. And that should be the progression that you're always keeping in mind. Pull down slow. And relax. All right, so once you've got some training under your belt with snatching up and bringing the weight back down to the rack, now we're gonna go for the full repetition all the way up and catching it in the hips all the way back down. Few things to keep in mind. Ideally, you've been practicing your cleans, right, before you ever start talking about the snatch. And we know in the cleans, when you drop, you keep the weight close, like you're unzipping your jacket, okay? Same thing in the snatch. In no point in time on the way up or the way down do we want that bell getting out too far in front of you. Keeping it very, very close, okay? So, theoretically, if you're standing like arm lengths away from a wall or from a camera, I should be able to do snatch repetitions without getting anywhere close to the wall or to the camera in this case, okay? So once you're at the top and you're ready to drop, all you gotta do is drop your wrist straight down. Technically, you're not in control of the weight. This can take some getting used to. It feels scary the first few times you do it, but you're literally just letting it drop right down in front of you. You're really just guiding the weight to keep it close without letting it drift out, okay? Then, once you're getting down to around, belly button height, you really pack the lat down and you push the weight back down into the backswing. And honestly, at that point, it's just like how you've been practicing with the clean drop, okay? The clean drop is a technique that we've covered in other videos, but it comes into play big time here because we're having to force the bell back into the hip hinge, back into the backswing. So, let's take a look. And there you have it. So you may have even noticed as the bell is coming down, my hand is barely even gripping it. You may have seen my fingers open at the top and even a little bit as I'm guiding the bell down. You do not want to death grip that bell. You want to let it pass from the heel of the hands at that lockout, then let it pass into the fingers on the way down. That's probably the subject of a whole nother video. I put out some information on that as well. But again, that's a technique that ideally you've also practiced in your cleans. That's why the snatch comes at the end of that sequence of lifts. Dialing in your swing, dialing in your clean, then learning the snatch becomes way, way easier. One final bonus tip when it comes to the kettlebell snatch that can make all the difference in how the entire repetition feels. And that is how you're timing your breath. I can tell you, everybody is guilty of mistiming their power breath with the snatch. Myself and pretty much everybody else included. So what do I mean exactly? Well, I won't demonstrate with a weight, but what you see happens a lot of times is someone will breathe in and then they'll breathe out on this lockout. Now, that may seem to make sense, like of course we're kind of breathing out at the end of the movement, right? Well, a couple things I take issue with on that. Number one, when you're locking out and you're exhaling, unless you're really, really paying attention, you're probably losing core engagement with that exhalation when you need it the most. When you're locking out that weight overhead, when the weight is balancing precariously over your noggin. Generally not a good idea. Second big problem with that is that you tend to get behind on your breathing, right? You start to almost get a little like breathing debt accumulating, and when you're doing more than like 10 repetitions, it usually starts to just mess up the whole timing of the lift. So do not breathe in and then out at the top. Rather, breathe in and breathe out with the hip extension. What that is gonna do is help to drive and really put some oomph into that hip extension, into that hip power, which we know hip power is the only thing you can rely on to get that bell straight up overhead. So the turnaround time seems a little quick between inhalation and exhalation, but when you really stop and think about it, it makes the most sense. And then there's some other breathing techniques you can do if you need more air in the system. But real quick, I'm just going to demonstrate, ideally, I'm gonna do my best, what a proper power exhalation on the hip extension looks and sounds like. And it's always a little bit quicker than you think, okay? Notice I'm making that sound, making that exhalation as soon as my hips extend, when the weight is still down here. A couple more times. And there you have it, guys. That is a primer on the one-arm kettlebell snatch. Review this video, take notes, just work on one cue at a time. Don't feel like you have to tackle the entire technique on your first workout. Take it one step at a time, enjoy the process. That's what training is all about. All the best in your training, and we'll see you next time.